Today I'm going to tell you a story so heavy, it could change the way you see justice. Set against the vast western frontier, where dust storms chase the sunset and danger grows in silence. It all happened in a place where fate pulled two men into a collision course they could never escape, and it began with something small. Just one act of disrespect. But it was enough to set off a chain reaction no one could stop. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. A brute slapped an aging barkeep, not realizing that the old man once shaped legends into deadly marksmen. Pour me something worth drinking, you dried-up relic. The growl rumbled from Riker Holt, a towering slab of violence standing in the doorway of the rusty nail saloon like thunder rolling in, 6'5" and carved from 260 pounds of bad intentions. His name carried whispers of cruelty from Deadwood to Santa Fe. Behind him, 3 of his men lounged against the rail, wearing the grins of wolves watching a wounded calf. The bartender never lifted his eyes from the glass he was drying. He was thin, pushing 70, and his hands trembled just enough to show age, but not weakness. His hair glistened white as winter snow, wire-rimmed spectacles resting on a nose that had clearly met more than one fist. "Whiskey costs the same for every man here," he murmured. "2 bits for the cheap kind, twice that for the good barrel." "I ain't your friend," Riker barked, boots striking the floorboards like a drumbeat of trouble. A couple ranch hands and a traveling peddler took the hint, vanishing through the back door like breath on cold air. "I don't pay in this dump, you understand?" This time, the old man looked up. His eyes were the pale gray of cold steel, and for a heartbeat, something sharp and dangerous flickered there. Something buried deep. It faded as fast as it came, replaced by the tired acceptance of someone who has spent too many years avoiding violence. "My place runs on rules," he answered. "Every man pays. Been that way longer than you've been breathing." Riker's fist shot forward, seizing the old man's collar, hauling him halfway across the bar. "Your rules just changed, old-timer." But what Riker Holt didn't know, what nobody in Timber Falls understood, was that the weary barkeep was Amos Creed, a man who once trained the greatest gun hands the frontier ever produced. 3 decades earlier, Amos Creed taught Clayton Earp to draw from the hip before a man could blink. Before we ride further into this tale, if you're enjoying it, saddle up by leaving a like and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Tell us where you're listening from. We love knowing how far these stories travel. Now hold on. The next moment will strike like lightning. The moment violence wrapped itself around his throat, Amos creased inside. Not afraid, not shaken, but cold and silent as the way a storm goes quiet before splitting open the earth. He hadn't felt that stillness since the day he packed away his pistols, swearing to his dying wife, Miriam Grace, that he would never again shape death with his hands. He once stood as the finest firearms instructor west of the Great River, taught Levi Hickok to read a man's intentions through his eyes before steel ever moved, schooled a young Dale Masterson that precision beats speed every single sunrise, even spent 2 weeks with Cyrus Hardin before the man's soul curdled, showing him how to measure wind and distance without thinking. 47 men had trained under Amos, men carved into frontier legends. 32 buried before their time. That was when he walked away. Sold his ranch outside Abilene, sold his customized Colts, and vanished into obscurity. Became just an old man serving drinks in a fading town, trying not to remember how many men had died because he once made them lethal. And now Riker Holt had him by the collar, his breath stinking of stale whiskey, cruelty boiling behind bloodshot eyes. Amos had seen men like Riker 1,000 times. Bullies who mistake size for strength, rage for authority, and fearlessness for power. Let go of my shirt, Amos said, voice flat, neither loud nor trembling. Riker laughed, rough and jagged. Or what? Gonna talk me to death, Grandpa? By then, the rest of the gang wandered in, spreading like a spill across the saloon. Amos's instincts, dusty but intact, sized them up instantly. Left side, Mexican, around 30. Remington worn high, slow but steady. Middle, young, 19 or 20, twin revolvers riding low, fast, careless, dangerous to everyone except his target. Right side, older, quiet, eyes like winter stone, single gun worn for work not show. That one had killed. Last chance, Amos murmured. But there was something beneath the tone, something that made Riker's crooked grin falter. Let go, pay for your whiskey, walk out of my place, do that. We end this quiet. For a fraction of a moment, Riker hesitated. Something in those gray eyes didn't belong to trembling hands. Then pride beat instinct. His palm cracked across Amos Creed's face. The slap rang like a rifle shot. Amos's spectacles flew, skittering across the bar. His head snapped sideways and blood traced his lower lip. A hush swallowed the saloon. Faces gathered in the windows, folks who had spent 3 weeks living under the shadow of Riker Holt's gang. They had watched their friends robbed, watched Wade Tiller, the town sheriff, beaten so badly he still couldn't stand, watched good people pay tribute simply to be left unbroken. Nobody ever stood against them. Amos straightened. He touched his bleeding lip, saw the scarlet smear on his fingers, then smiled. Not kindly, not angry. The smile of a man who finally made a decision he had avoided for 30 years. That, Amos said softly, was a mistake, boy. Riker's hand dropped toward the dragoon at his hip. You threatening me. Amos bent down slowly, retrieving his broken spectacles. One lens cracked like frost spreading across winter glass. He placed them gently on the counter and turned back, his eyes not pale anymore, but grave, hard, not unlike staring into headstones under moonlight. I know exactly who you are, Riker Holt, he said. A bully who preys on men who can't fight back. You and your boys have bled Timber Falls dry, beat Wade Tiller half to death. And the room understood. The old bartender wasn't old anymore. He wasn't weak. He was something far worse. A man who knew exactly how this would end. The silence inside the saloon felt heavy enough to crush a man. No one had ever stood against them, because no one ever could. Even Riker Holt's crew stopped shifting, the swagger draining from them. But there's something you don't know, the old man said, his voice quiet but reaching every dark corner of the room. My name is Amos Creed. 30 years back, I ran a training yard outside Abilene. I taught men how to draw clean, shoot straight, and end a fight before the other fellow even understood it started. He didn't shout those names. He spoke them like truths carved in tombstone granite. Levi Hickok, Clayton Earp, Dale Masterson, Cyrus Hardin, before that man turned dark. Every one of them learned at my range. I was the finest firearms instructor west of the Mississippi. Riker's sneer wavered. Even a fool in the desert had heard those names, legends carved into the spine of the West. You're lying, he muttered, but the words lacked backbone. You're just another worn-out barkeep telling ghost stories. Amos moved toward the end of the bar, body still showing its years. But the tremor was gone. He reached beneath the counter and drew out a wooden lockbox. Its hinges rusted, clasp untouched for decades. He slipped a small key from the chain around his neck and opened it. Inside lay a gun belt, wrapped in oiled cloth, cared for like holy scripture. The leather was aged, darkened, perfectly kept, The holster was crafted for one specific draw: fast, efficient, silent. And then he lifted the revolver. A Colt single-action army, ivory grips dulled from time, steel etched with hand-worked scroll designs. Along its barrel, 47 small notches had been carved, one for every student who rose to legend. He hadn't laid a hand on that pistol in 3 decades. He'd sworn to Miriam Grace, on her final breath, that he would never wear it again, that he was finished shaping killers, finished fueling death. But Miriam had never stood face to face with Riker Holt. She never saw what happens when brutality goes unchallenged. The belt settled around Amos Creed's waist like it had never been removed. His hands no longer trembled, buckling leather with practiced precision, positioning holster exactly where muscle memory demanded. Every motion clean from 10,000 repetitions. "I've been retired 30 years, Amos said, voice dropping lower, not frail now, not weary. It was the voice of the man who once shaped legends. "I haven't fired this gun since the day I buried my wife. I swore I never would again. But you, son, you struck me in my own place, in front of witnesses. And if I let that stand, every bully between the Rio Grande and Cheyenne will think they can do the same." Riker staggered back a half step. "So here's how this ends. You and me. We walk outside, settle it the old way. First draw lives. Loser goes into the dirt." Riker tried to laugh, but it cracked on the way up. "You're insane. I'm the fastest gun across 3 territories. I've killed 19 men. "I know," Amos replied. "I counted." His voice held no flair, no brag, just truth. "Let me tell you something about those 19 deaths. 3 were store clerks, 5 were ranch hands, 4 were drunkards, 2 were men older than I am today. Not one was a real gunfighter. You're quick at killing slow men, Riker. That's not the same as being fast." The words drifted across the room like gun smoke settling. His 3 men glanced at one another, because their leader's reputation had always been built on punching down. And this wasn't a weak victim. This was someone who knew exactly how death worked. "You calling me a coward?" Riker blurted, desperate to pull the room back into his hands. "No," Amos answered. "I'm telling you the truth. There's a difference between a gunman and a murderer. You're just the latter pretending to be the former." He walked toward the door, and the onlookers outside parted like creek water around a stone. "But I'll give you a chance," Amos continued. "Walk away. Take your boys with you. Leave Timber Falls and never set foot here again. Do that, and you live." Riker's face flushed red, then drained white. He looked to his crew, saw doubt in their eyes. His pride, his whole identity, hung in the balance. Or, Amos's voice cut through the stillness. "We settle it under the sun. And I promise you, son, you'll not be the first man I've killed. Won't even be the 20th. I stopped counting at 42. Amos stepped out into the afternoon glare. Behind him, Riker Holt stood frozen, hand hovering near his pistol, sweat rising despite the autumn chill. His men watched him, waiting to see if the tyrant they'd followed would now stand before a legend or fold in the dust. Outside, the street lay wide and open, dusty planks and sagging storefronts watching like silent witnesses. Timber Falls was dying slow. The silver seams dried up years ago. And for 3 long weeks, the folks who stayed had lived under the shadow of Riker Holt's gang. They watched as the old barkeep stepped straight into the dust-choked street and turned to face the swinging doors of the saloon. Amos Creed stood center road, the afternoon sun pouring fire across his back. Smart positioning. He angled himself so the glare hit his opponent square in the eyes. It was an old maneuver, one he'd taught Clayton Earp back in '76. His hand rested near his holstered Colt, not touching it, merely waiting. More people gathered, filling windows, leaning over porches, whispering across hitch rails. Who is he really? Can he truly stand against Riker Holt? Inside, Riker tried to think himself out of this reckoning. Every instinct howled at him to walk away. But pride is a stubborn overseer, and reputation is a fragile thing. If he backed down now, he'd lose everything: fear, loyalty, and the illusion of power. He stepped into the street with his 3 men shadowing him. The 2 gunfighters stopped 10 paces apart. 40 feet separated them, too far for most shooters to land a solid shot. But Riker didn't know that Amos trained his students to strike center chest at 75. "You sure about this, old man?" Riker called, voice stretching for courage it didn't have. "Once steel clears leather, there's no undoing it. You'll die in this street." Amos answered quietly, the sound carrying clean through the windless air. "They'll remember. They always do." Town and wind both went silent. 2 men stood facing each other, and everyone knew. Only one would step away. Amos studied the big outlaw's stance the way others read scripture. Weight shifted wrong, shoulders too tight, right hand hovering too close. Riker was powerful, but size is a curse in a gunfight. More surface to hit, slower recovery, a body fighting itself. Pride won the argument inside Riker Holt's skull. His hand dropped. His revolver came up faster than the saloon crowd expected, fast enough to startle even Amos. The dragoon cleared leather in a blur, hammer cocked back mid-motion. But Amos Creed had once trained Hickok, Masterson, and Hardin, before that man turned wicked, and Amos had always been the one they tried, and failed, to beat. He moved with no wasted breath, no hesitation. His Colt materialized in his hand like something summoned. The hammer fell a heartbeat before Riker's finger found its trigger. 2 explosions shook the street, one slightly ahead of the other. The difference was everything. Amos's bullet slammed into Riker's chest dead center, tearing through sternum, unraveling his heart. Riker's return shot flew wild, jerking upward, thrown off by the force already ending him. He staggered, eyes blown wide with disbelief. His revolver slipped from numb fingers. The man who terrorized 3 territories dropped to his knees and stared at the widening stain across his shirt as if reality were an insult. Then he fell forward and stayed still. The town held its breath for 3 long beats. Then the surviving 3 reached for steel. Mateo Cruz drew first. Wrong stance, too square, chest exposed like a barn door. Amos's second shot caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him so hard his gun cartwheeled away. Cruz hit the dirt screaming. Luke Avery, eager and reckless, got both pistols out. But wild youth sprays lead like untrained thunder. 5 shots, dust kicked everywhere. But not one slug struck true. Amos's third shot punched into his thigh, folding him like a snapped fence post. The last man, Roan Cutter, stood steady, gun raised, eyes cold. He faced Amos now, and for one suspended breath, both men knew the truth. Amos had already dropped 3 men in less than 4 seconds. His hand did not shake. His aim did not wander. Roan saw all of it. He slowly lowered his gun, letting it fall into the dirt. He lifted both hands. "I'm done. This ain't my fight no more." Amos didn't blink. "Good. Now gather your boys, get them patched up, then ride out of Timber Falls, and don't set foot here again, any of you." Roan nodded. "Clear as glass, Mr. Creed." He hauled Luke Avery upright, then helped Mateo Cruz to his feet. The three stumbled toward their horses, leaving Riker Holt's body sprawled in the dust. Amos stood alone in the center of the street, smoke curling from his barrel like fading snake trail. His hand trembled now, late, when everything was already finished. His shoulder ached. His knees felt weak. He wasn't young anymore, and his bones made sure he knew it. Then the crowd erupted. Hands reached for him. Voices praised him, everyone calling him their savior. But Amos felt none of it. No triumph, no thrill. He had killed a man, and there is nothing glorious in that. For the first time in 30 long years, it felt exactly the way he remembered it. Hollow, cold, and as empty as winter wind blowing through abandoned corrals. There was no triumph in it. No reward. Just the weight of another life added to the tally he would carry until the ground took him. Silas Merrick forced his way through the excited crowd. "Mr. Creed, that was incredible." "I need a chair," Amos Creed murmured, voice thin and fading. His knees buckled, and Silas caught him beneath the arms, guiding him to a bench outside the mercantile. Amos sat hard, revolver still resting in his palm. He stared at it like a stranger looks at an unclaimed relic. 47 notches cut along the barrel. Should he add one more? For Riker Holt? Or would carving a mark for a brute insult the names of true gunfighters he once shaped? "Somebody bring him water," Silas shouted, and the crowd eased back, though their eyes clung to Amos with a mix of awe, fear, and reverence. They were no longer seeing the man who poured whiskey. They were seeing the ghost of the legend beneath him. He would never again simply be the barkeep of Timber Falls. Then Vernon Crowley pushed forward, face red, words tumbling out. "Mr. Creed, the town council wants to appoint you acting marshal. Wade Tiller won't stand on his feet for months. We need—" "No." Just one word. Flat, final, cutting through noise like a clean blade. "I'm no lawman, never was. I'm just a bartender." "But you saved this town." "I killed a man, Mayor." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "That's all I did." Maybe he needed killing, but that doesn't make it noble. Amos rose slowly, joints barking their complaints. "Riker's body needs burying. Someone ought to fetch his horse too. It didn't earn dying for its owner's sins. And someone notify the territorial marshal. They'll want it recorded." The crowd split, giving him space. His stride steadier, though his heart felt weighted like an iron kettle. He stepped back inside the rusty nail, went straight behind the counter, and pulled out a bottle reserved for days of celebration. Or days of ruin. This day qualified as both. His hands trembled when he lifted the glass. Whiskey burned down his throat, but it couldn't burn away the look in Riker Holt's eyes when life drained out of him. Couldn't silence the screams Mateo Cruz made when the bullet hit bone. Couldn't drown the dull thud of men collapsing into dust. He poured a second shot and retreated to the table in the far corner. He sat with his back to the wall. Old habit carved into muscle memory long before peace had ever pretended to visit his life. He stared at nothing. His mind replayed the gunfight like lessons on a chalkboard. The stance, the distance, the timing, the angle of sunlight. Everything he did had been flawless. So why did it feel like failure? Later, when the saloon emptied, Amos walked out through the back door and followed the path to the small cemetery on the hill. A single headstone waited there. Miriam Grace, beloved wife. Moonlight washed the graveyard silver. The air carried the smell of sage and cool earth. Amos knelt beside the stone. "I broke my word today, Maggie," he whispered. "I told you I would never draw that gun again. Told you I was done with killing. But a bad man came riding in here. Nobody else could stop him. So I did what I swore I wouldn't do. Crickets sang in the grass. He sat down slowly, bones stiff and uncooperative, letting the cold seep into his knees. Silas says I'm a hero. Says I saved this town. He exhaled. Maybe he's right. But it doesn't feel like saving anything, Maggie. Feels like slipping back into the man I tried so long not to be. He sat quietly, letting the night speak. He pictured her face. Clear, calm, unafraid. She never looked at him like the others did. She never gazed at a gunslinger, only at a man. You asked me to leave violence behind, he whispered. And I tried. God knows I tried. His eyes lifted toward the moving heavens. But maybe Silas is right. Maybe I wasn't trying to stop being violent. Maybe I was just trying to stop believing that violence was all I was ever good for. The stars turned overhead, slow and unbothered, as if the whole universe knew the truth long before he dared to speak it aloud. In the distance, an owl cried into the dark and fading sky. Amos Creed stayed seated beside the gravestone, unsure for the first time in decades which road lay ahead. He couldn't return to pouring whiskey like nothing had happened. Folks now knew who he truly was beneath the quiet apron and worn boots. And he wasn't about to start shaping killers again. He was too old. And the frontier was turning into something else entirely. The West was changing its skin. Fences rising where open plains once breathed, courtrooms taking the place of quick justice. Maybe the world no longer had use for a man like him. Amos pushed himself up slowly, knees crackling like burnt timber. He brushed the top of Miriam Grace's headstone with his fingertips. I'll figure something out, Maggie, he whispered. I always do. Just wanted you to know I didn't break that promise without cause. I won't strap this gun on again unless the world leaves me no choice. 3 days later, a rider from the Territorial Marshal's office rode into town. A young man named Jace Hollander. He took Amos's sworn account of the gunfight, then said something that rattled the old man. Before I took this assignment, I trained 2 years under a man named Rowan Prescott. He told me you were the best instructor he ever met. Said everything he knew came from you. A cold ripple crept through Amos. One more thread from his past, reaching into the present. Rowan was a good man, Amos muttered. He was, Jace answered. But he died 3 years back. Arrow took him in the neck during a bank job. Saved an entire town's payroll before he fell. Amos shut his eyes a moment. One more student gone, one more name folded into the dirt. He trained you well? Amos asked. As well as a man could be taught, Jace replied. He said you made us understand that a gun isn't a toy, it's judgment. Every round fired has a consequence, and the best gunfight is the one that never needs to happen. Jace swallowed, then continued. The Marshal's office wants to expand law protection to more towns. We need instructors, men who can teach deputies the right way, not show-offs, not gunfighters. Lawmen, folks who know the difference between justice and ego. Amos poured himself coffee, letting silence brew thicker than steam. I'm 70 years old, son. Too old to be shaping anyone. Jace shook his head. You just outdrew Riker Holt and dropped 3 more before the dust even rose. I'm telling you, your age isn't the part that matters. The West is turning civilized, and we need men like you to raise the next line. Teach them why to fire, not just how. The echo of Silas Merrick's earlier words hung between them. Amos looked around the saloon he had hidden behind for so many years. This had been his refuge, his retreat from a harsh legacy. But maybe, just maybe, that legacy could finally serve something better. I'd have to stay here in Timber Falls, he said. I'm too old to be wandering. That works, Jace answered. We send deputies to you. You train them here. The marshal's office pays for the time and supplies. Amos remained quiet, staring past Jace, thinking of 47 students, 32 gone beneath wooden markers. Thinking of Rowan Prescott dying upright and honorable. Thinking of Clayton Earp keeping peace in Dodge City. Thinking of the lives saved by good men who'd learned restraint instead of speed. Give me a week, Amos said at last. I need time to consider the weight of what you're asking. A week passed. Then he gave his answer. I'll do it, but on my conditions. I stay here. I don't wear a badge. I don't chase outlaws. I teach, and that's all. Jace grinned. The marshal agrees to those terms. When can you start? Send me someone willing to learn. We'll see if I still remember how to shape a man's hand. 3 days later, the first deputy arrived. Young fellow named Eli Boone. Clumsy with steel, eyes too soft for killing. Amos worked with him for 2 full weeks, teaching how to stand, how to breathe, how to read a man's intent before the draw ever began. Most importantly, how to walk away before trouble turned into graves. Eli Boone would never become a legend, not by speed or by name. But when he rode away, he rode with clean judgment and safe hands, able to defend the helpless without becoming dangerous to the innocent. That alone made him worth shaping. He turned out to be exactly the kind of lawman the New West needed. Word spread fast. Before long, the territorial marshal's office sent more men, deputies, sheriffs, and green recruits from lonely settlements across Colorado and Wyoming, riding dusty trails just to learn from the quiet old man behind the bar. Amos Creed trained them with the same patient discipline he once used on legends. He didn't just show them how to draw iron. He taught them why a man should or shouldn't. He taught judgment, responsibility, restraint. Over the next 5 years, Amos shaped 63 lawmen. Not one became a celebrated gunfighter. Their names never made a headline. But they saved lives. Hundreds of them. They stopped robbers, broke up lynch mobs, rescued families, and held the line in towns that once felt forgotten by God. They were ghosts doing good work, making the frontier safer one dusty county at a time. Amos watched them ride away with pride, not fear. Pride because, for once, what he taught was being used to build, not destroy. Under their quiet protection, Timber Falls revived. Word spread that it was a safe town to raise a family. New merchants hung signs, children played in the street, families moved in, storefronts filled again. Even the old silver mine reopened. A place that had been slowly dying found its pulse again. Amos still served whiskey, still slept in the small room above the rusty nail. But 3 mornings a week, the saloon turned into a classroom. And on those mornings, he was no longer just Amos the bartender. He was Amos Creed, shaping the next line of peacekeepers. 5 years after facing down Riker Holt, a letter arrived from Clayton Earp, now well known across Dodge City and Tombstone. Mr. Creed, heard you brought yourself back into the light to train young lawmen. Long overdue. Everything you taught me still guides my days. If you ever drift toward Arizona, I owe you a glass of whiskey. Amos pinned the letter behind the bar. One letter became several. Notes from Dale Masterson, from Jace Hollander, from dozens of others he'd trained. They were reminders that lives were being spared because of lessons he once believed were curses. One warm spring morning, 10 years after the gunfight, Amos awoke unable to rise from bed. His body had simply decided it was done. Silas Merrick checked him gently and said the truth. Your heart's giving out, Amos. Could be a few weeks, could be less. Amos nodded. Death wasn't an enemy, just another door he'd eventually walk through. He asked Silas to send word, and they came. For 2 weeks, men arrived from all directions. Old sheriffs, young deputies, weathered marshals, each one carrying a story, a memory, or a debt. Jace Hollander brought his wife and children. "You changed my life," he told Amos. "My kids will grow up safer because of you." Even Clayton Earp made the long journey. He sat beside Amos's bed until dawn shared its light. "You did good work," Clayton finally said. "Better than you ever realized. The West is full of men who learned from you. You didn't just teach aim, you taught conscience, you taught choice. That's what mattered." On a quiet afternoon, windows open, sage wind drifting through, Amos Creed slipped away in his sleep. 75 years old and at peace. They laid him beside Miriam Grace in the cemetery above Timber Falls. Nearly 300 people came. Students he shaped, lawmen he trained, townsfolk whose lives were protected by men carrying his lessons. Colton Reeves, once a student and now sheriff, stepped forward to deliver the eulogy. Amos Creed spent the first half of his life teaching men how to kill, and it haunted him. So he walked away. But when evil rode into our town, he stood up, not for pride, not for glory, but because it was right. And then he did something greater. He turned his skill into something that saved instead of destroyed. Over 10 years, he trained 63 lawmen. Not one became a gunslinger, but everyone became a protector. That is Amos Creed's legacy. Afterward, lawmen raised their revolvers and fired 3 rounds into the sky. Thunder rolled down the valley, echoing farewell. His grave was marked with a simple stone: Amos Creed, teacher, bartender, protector. He taught us when to fight and when not to. The rusty nail remained, passed into new hands. Yet no one changed the name. Behind the bar, locked behind glass, hung Amos's gun belt and coat. Beneath it, a plaque read, "The Gun of Amos Creed." He trained legends and lawmen. Both saved lives. Years rolled forward. The frontier softened. Rail lines spread. Judges replaced pistols. But in small towns, men who learned from Amos, or who learned from men trained by Amos, kept peace with quiet dignity. And through them, the old gunslinger lived on. Not in bullets, but in restraint, fairness, decency, and the belief that justice mattered only when mercy walked beside it. The age of fast-draw duels slipped into history, replaced slowly by courtrooms, county marshals, and written law. Yet scattered across small frontier towns, men shaped by Amos Creed or taught by someone trained under him continued guarding their streets. They carried his lessons like scripture. Violence is the final answer. A revolver is a tool, not something to polish for bragging rights. And protecting the helpless outweighs ego, fame, or headlines. Timber Falls, now alive with a railroad stop, electric lamps glowing at dusk, and new families settling in, turned the old rusty nail into a piece of frontier heritage. Travelers stepped off the train and visited the saloon where a 70-year-old barkeep outfought Riker Holt, where the first group of peacekeepers learned to outthink trouble instead of outrun it. They placed a statue at the center of town, not showing Amos Creed in a firing stance, not glorifying a death shot, but standing patiently beside a student, correcting form, demonstrating a clean draw with calm intention. The plaque beneath it read, "Amos Creed, 1805-1880. He taught legends to shoot straight, then taught lawmen something greater. He taught them justice. On warm evenings, when sunlight slid behind the Colorado ridges, folks gathered at the cemetery hill, where Amos rested beside Miriam Grace, and retold the story of the day he stepped into the street. Alone, steady, unafraid. They also spoke of the 63 men whose hands he steadied, whose judgment he shaped, and how each one carried his compassion into their own towns. And sometimes, on a still breeze, locals swore they could hear the faint roll of gunfire, not the fury of the old Wild West, but the echo of a salute honoring the man who turned violence into something purposeful. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting, as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.